We're here today with Nawal Qarooni, author of Nourishing Caregiver Collaborations. My copy, I don't know if I think it's one of these in the corner on my bookshelf here. And before I turn things over, I just wanted to remind folks that our conference is really, again, made possible by supporters, by donors, and by our generous sponsors, Teacher Powered Schools, Learning Inspire Ed, So-Called Moran Partners, the Stimbunks Foundation. We've got What School Could Be. We've got KMS, Intercultural Education, and the Lab for New Teaching. So be sure to check those folks out, give them a shout out, and I'll turn everything over to you, Nawal. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Listen, I really, really value the work that you do at Human Restoration Project. I have always wanted to present at this conference. I'm so grateful for all of you being here, doing some summer learning together, because it's a testament to, your own journeys and everything that you're kind of putting first in the summertime. So thank you. And Heather, hi, my friend. My internet friend who had a dentist appointment this morning and tried to rush to see me. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to talk a lot about family connections, and I'm going to talk about being a mom and being a caregiver, and I'm going to talk about being a classroom practitioner, and I'm going to talk about being a teacher educator. I'm currently teaching at New York University, and I consult in schools across the country. My center of gravity is family engagement, though I'm not just the family engagement lady. My work is in literacy. I was a literacy teacher for many years in many different grades in Brooklyn and in Chicago. So I'm just going to tell you a teeny bit about me. I was a newspaper journalist before I was a teacher in Newark, New Jersey. And then I felt like I wasn't making change. I was just like reporting real sadness. And so I decided to do New York City Teaching Fellows. And that's how I transitioned into education. I was a teacher in Brooklyn before I moved to Chicago. I was a teacher there. I became a literacy coach, and then I started facilitating PD and literacy. I had the opportunity to design the family engagement program for Chicago Public Schools during COVID, when I was also like mothering my 4 kids on screen and also trying to like juggle COVID, learning, remote learning, and coach teachers. And I realized at that time that families were trying to do the same work that we were trying to do in the classroom. So that's the research that came into the book, Nourishing Caregiver Collaborations. It really is my baby. 4 kids is truly bananas. And so this is the part that really shows my intersectionality, that I am like a classroom teacher and I'm a consultant in schools, predominantly in LA, Chicago, and in New York. But I'm like very much also, I'm coming to you as a caregiver with kids in 4 different schools also. And these are my parents, who so much made me, to the point that my sister just got like their birthdays on her feet. And I was like, why? And she was like, we are them. And I was like, you're right. Okay, fine. So my parents are Iranian immigrants. They were born and raised in Iran and met in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania randomly when they were going to university. And so like, I just want to share that like a lot of these kind of lenses contribute to my understanding of how we engage with families, that you'll hear kind of more about as I move forward. So we're gonna tackle these 4 components in the next 2 hours. You are adult learners, so when the bum is numb, so is the brain. Please get up and move. If you need to move, please do what you need to do. And I will like maybe give a break at the time that it feels fine. So we're just going to talk about our own language stories. I'm going to really push to unpack our own biases that we all carry around families and what they bring. And we're going to expand the definitions of literacy. And then I really want to talk about, and I think this is kind of like the sexiest part of the work, our family lab sites, which I love to do, which is when I invite families into classroom spaces. And I model that in schools across the country. And I think it's like the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to how we can invite families to do work with us. Okay, any questions? You can like add it into the chat. Okay, cool. So the parts of my book that I'm going to kind of tackle and explain are the first chapter, all about how families have been knowing forever how to grow literacy, whether they speak English or not, no matter what socioeconomic background they come from, families have been growing literacy, reading, writing, communication, emotional literacy, observational literacy, all these different lenses forever. The second chapter is about how we can communicate more lovingly with families and all the like myriad ways that we can reach out and connect to families. And then each of the blue, process, the collective, observational literacy, the power of talk, the power of choice, those are each chapters in the book, and you don't necessarily need to read them in order. So each of those chapters kind of breaks down how families can elevate those things and how we can elevate those things in the classroom. Just so that you kind of know the nuts and bolts of the actual book. And then lastly, the family lab sites are at the end, where I describe how I invite families in, literally to do something and be their kid's partner, to do like a turn and talk with their child, to do an activity that is going to lead itself to some sort of writing or some sort of reading work, no matter what your curriculum is. And then all of these resources that I describe are on my website. There's like a tab that says book, and that tab has lots of like art that I analyze with kids and families, book lists that I use. So just like peep the website, that might be a useful resource. Okay, moving forward. Can you please write down your current definition of family engagement? You can write this in your notebook, you can put it in the chat, but what right now to you feels like a working definition? Thank you, Ryan, for putting that in there. So we've got words like access, super important, the historically hard to reach, thinking about whose voices we don't usually hear from. What else? What does engagement call to mind? Collaboration, partnership. I like that it's a working definition. Consistent. Open and comfortable. We're like co-growing. Okay, cool resource from Head Start. I really like the idea of a complexity in the definition of what family engagement is. Okay, so I want you to hold all of this in your minds and see if your definition changes or if you can add to it over the course of the next 2 hours. Yes, I want to think a lot about direction. So Nick is asking if there is like in family engagement, is there a direction with which we engage with families? Is there a location that is necessary when families engage? Like, what are the components that is necessary if we're thinking about family engagement? What does it really mean to truly engage with our families and be partners and be collaborators and create these open and loving spaces where families feel like they can co-create and be part of the classroom experience, and they don't feel like totally othered and or embarrassed to ask questions, or they don't know what their children are really doing other than like, what is the grade and how are they behaving, right? And so I just kind of want to think about our definition and see if it changes. And so when we talk about family engagement, the most important thing, I mean, like any work we do, is to really excavate our own archaeology, to figure out where we stand, to figure out what our language journeys are, to figure out what our intersectionalities are, so that we move beyond surface level understanding of the kids and families in our care. And one way to do that is to really sit with all your own intersections. And so I like to do this thing where I like make a web, and I'm like very visual. So you can do it like you put your name in the middle, you can make a little, visual web, you can make a list, but what are all the intersections in your life to show? And so we have no privacy between us and our neighbors, but I'm leaning very hard into the collective care element because there are a lot of kids. And so we do this thing where I say, like, I cooked for everybody on a Tuesday night, send your kids. That way somebody else does it for me on another day when I really need somebody to feed my kids. And so what are the elements of care in your life? Let's just take like 5 minutes. I take care of myself through yoga. Right now, I'm leaning into like being a good community member. You might have like your spiritual community on your map, but what are the ways that you give care? So you can put your classroom, if you're a classroom teacher, you can put your community or your teachers if you are a school leader. But what are the relationships in your life where you are giving care? And then what literacy is living in those relationships? So, to whom or what do you give care? And what elements of literacy, like storytelling or listening or recording or reading or writing or creating, come of that care? So when I do this with folks, they're constantly talking, especially like if they're multilingual folks and they like have, I mean, we have WhatsApp chats in the Middle East, like that are on fleek. They're just like very, very, very robust conversations happening on WhatsApp, right? That are like videos being sent to each other. And so what are the kinds of communication modes that you're using with the people in your life who you have relationships with? Where does literacy live? So you can make it look like this. You can make it look like mine. You can put little lines. You can make it a web, but just like take a minute and sketch out the folks in your care and how literacy lives in those spaces. Is this a more useful slide or is this a more useful slide? Somebody unmute.
I wonder if the previous one might be useful because we can kind of see that example because
Sure,
I copied the question over into the chat. So
sure,
if it would
perfect.
be useful to have the model and we can look at reference the question in the chat is
Yeah,
my I'm just one vote of 44 here.
that's great. Thank you so much. So take a moment and just kind of sketch out the relationships in your life where you're giving care and what kind of literacy lives in those relationships. I'm just going to take about like four-ish minutes to do that. About 2 more minutes. And we'll do some talking.
small, but you have to like shift them between each situation.
Yeah,
And I was
absolutely.
surprised at how much like overlaps with all of the different like me's.
Yeah, that's awesome. In addition to maybe like also folks with multilingualism and like when we're toggling between languages and who we use what language with and when, right? Yeah. Who else? Who was my friend who unmuted and wanted to say something?
What's up, Nawal? You're a fellow New Jerseyan. I just know that when I started in a new school community, I moved there for the school and parent communication, it was like such a two-way street. Like I was wanting to be there as an advisee for that student and learn about him and his family at home, but also it was so inviting of them when they offered to make a meal at their home with me. And it was almost like an extension of family, not just being a teacher. So it was like me developing a sense of who I was in that community through their invitation.
Yeah, that's a super beautiful segue because so much of this work is not checklist work. So much of it doesn't feel like, oh, I did the thing, but it's like a really kind of woven and holistic reframing of the way that we are with families, period. And so you really speak to that. And that's what I'm trying to get us to think about that we often don't have time to think about during the school year. And so I'm going to tell you just a really quick story. When I was in Pittsburgh, my dad is Arab, so I'm actually multi-ethnic. My dad is Bahraini. All of his roots come from a small island off the coast of Kuwait. Does anybody know the island of Bahrain? Michael Jackson had a house there, so my cousins used to like see him all the time. It's teeny tiny. And so my family wanted me to experience it, and they didn't have the means for us all to go. And because both of my parents speak Farsi, they really wanted me to like understand and learn my Arab side, which is only on my dad's side. So I flew to the Middle East by myself when I was 11. And so like my mom sewed cash in my pocket because they could only afford the one ticket. I wore like big red glasses and Karopi pants. It was like before 9/11. I mean, it was just such a seminal experience for me. And so this was like my great uncle's backyard and all the cousins who lived there. And I realized in just kind of my thinking about my own language journey, how much I learned at the kitchen table. And so like Jim mentioned, that we learn a lot about ourselves when we gather. We learn a lot about others when we gather and break bread. I learned how to be nimble because I watched, recipes being changed when the ingredient wasn't there. I learned my identity, my family identity, and stories about my father because I learned that this very specific fish that only is in those very salty waters around Bahrain, it's called zobeda, was like a fish that my dad was obsessed with when my grandmother like dried it, and he would like fight over this like dried fish and like keep it in his pockets, which I think is like very hilarious. But I like learned about my like pain in the behind father, right? Like I heard these stories about when he was young. I learned about just like grieving rituals and about like planning the day, because this is where everything and all the conversation would happen at the morning table, right? At the kitchen table, when there were like all the women would gather and kind of like figure out what the day was going to look like. I learned about kind of the cultural differences between men and women in my family specifically at that time. So I was like learning a lot through osmosis, but there is just so much to be learned at the kitchen table. There's so much about our own language stories that are learned around kind of gathering. This fruit is called beh in Farsi. It's like B-E-H. I think it's a pomelo in English. But like my grandmother has a very specific jam recipe for it that I had to like learn when I was there. And I like brought jars home for all of my aunts and uncles. And so a lot of my kind of story is rooted in food, nourishment, and food stories. I have a whole chapter in my book about food stories. So one of the things that I like to do with students and I like to do with families, no matter what age or grade you have, you can do some version of this over time, is to kind of excavate and understand how language was developed in their spaces. And so you can kind of assign this, create this, learn about language stories in a variety of ways over the course of a year. But I just want to share with you this one video. Luz Yadira Herrera is the co-author of En Comunidad that she wrote with Dr. Carla España. She's a really good friend of mine. She also wrote the afterword to my book. And so she had assigned this to her students. And I just want to watch a video clip because I want us to start thinking about our own language stories and kind of the language stories of our students. And so I am going to play this video. Let me see if it works like this. Let me know if you can't hear it, okay? Or maybe give me a thumbs up if you can.
This is a story about my language by Ileana Gonzalez. As a young child, I grew up speaking Spanish only. My mother and grandparents only spoke Spanish, and my grandparents didn't know how to read or write. My mother worked in the mornings and cleaned the doctor's office in the evening. Since my mom worked in the mornings cleaning houses, and in the evenings she spent her time cleaning a local doctor's office, we spent majority of that time with my grandma. That time was spent with my grandma as she taught us various things: how to make abuelita chocolate, how to make tortillas, and how to sew. One of my favorite memories with my grandma is watching novelas at night, and usually watching them until my mother came home before we went to bed. My grandma also introduced us to prayer, and she would show us the communion book to learn our prayers in order for us to do our first communion. Oftentimes, I would tag along with my mom as she cleaned the doctor's office in the evening. During that time, I would roam the hallways and the waiting room to look at all the various books. Oftentimes, you could find me in the waiting room, spending majority of my time there looking at all the children's books. They also had this highlights magazine for children. I would love to read the stories in there and also coloring the hidden puzzles. Although my mom couldn't read in English, she made sure that we had books at home. And when she had time, she would read The Ugly Duckling to us. Even though it was in English, she would show us the pictures and sound out the words the best that she could. To assure that we had reading at home, my mother often would order books through a mail order subscription, or she would order books from a book order from school. I still remember this wooden box that represented the wooden treasure box from Little Mermaid. Inside was filled with several books, all stories from the Little Mermaid. Even though my mom couldn't read it to us, I remember looking through the books with my sisters and just being so amazed with all the different colors and the shiny pages. My memory from learning to read comes from my second grade teacher, Miss Halverson. She introduced us to have a love of reading in the classroom, and my first chapter book was The Boxcar Children, and I loved reading the Amelia Bedelia books. A culture tradition that I grew up with is meeting at the table and having a conversation, either over café, abuelita chocolate, and pan dulce. It didn't matter what type of food we had in front of us. What mattered is the conversation that we built. Another favorite pastime growing up was watching my mother clean the nopales from our backyard. Watching her and my grandparents have a conversation and listen to music, and listening to my grandpa tell stories of his childhood. This is something that I hope to carry on to my own family, is having the honor and privilege of having nopales in my backyard to clean them while I sit with my own family, having conversation and telling stories.
Okay, so while you were watching that video, a lot of you in the chat were talking about how it was moving you and how the different types of literacy that, you know, existed for this student came to her in life. I want you to be thinking about your own now, your own experience in language stories. Let me see if I can go here so that you can see my visual. You still see my screen? Do you all see my screen? Okay. Thinking about your own experiences, right? And so I do this with families in workshops when across the year, and I can talk about that with family lab sites. But first I want us to try it, right? So imagine if you were either writing, drawing, or making a slide or a collage about it, thinking about where language lived for you. These are kind of the questions that helped prompt that for me. Who are the people in your life who allowed you to be fully seen? Where did language live for you? Who were the people in your life who were agents of change? Because usually those are the folks where storytelling, talking, and listening happened. In which spaces could you mostly be yourself? Because usually those are the places where you then were able to express yourself. Whose voices did you first and mostly hear? Which moments in your life held story? What kinds of texts? And we're talking music, we're talking geographic spaces, like we're talking, you know, art literacy and emotional literacy. What kinds of texts shaped your language trajectory? Where did literacy grow for you, right? And so if you were thinking about making your own visual, it could look like this. This comes from Dr. Alfred Tatum's text lineage, where I basically, starting from the left side is how you read this visual. I thought about those questions to draw out all the ways that language and literacy came to my life, right? So on the far left, I put the Persian Shahnameh because my mom didn't read to me from a book, but she told me stories from this like ancient Persian lore verbally. I put this Nadia Comaneci Sports Illustrated image because my family text, I'm not even kidding, is this made-for-TV movie about Nadia Comaneci, the Romanian gymnast who won the first perfect 10, because my mother was obsessed with her. The movie is extremely inappropriate for children now that I've rewatched it as an adult. And my siblings and I can say every single line verbatim, to the point that my sister texted me yesterday, like, I'm getting this quote, who's getting it with me? Like, from this made for TV movie. It's a text in our life, right? Like, so this is my mother. I'm in her belly. She's 6 months pregnant. This is my aunt. I grew up with these people in one multi-generational home. This is my aunt, my dad's sister. My cousin is in her belly. She's the one who designed the cover of Nourishing Caregiver Collaborations and all the beautiful icons inside. She took a lot of the pictures. This is my father. This is his sister. I put like rice, I put the kitchen table, I put the Star Ledger where I was a newspaper reporter. You keep reading across this text. The Lauryn Hill album was, you know, a seminal text in my life because I was in high school and it was all I listened to. And I put the two only picture books that my mother did read to me over and over again because that was, you know, all I had. I was obsessed with the Babysitters Club. I went to several different libraries to get to every single one of them. This was the first album I bought for $19.99 at the Monroeville Mall that I just got on vinyl, right? So what would exist on your text lineage? Where does language and literacy live for you? I put here a video of Gugush, which is my mother's favorite kind of singer. She's like an Adele of Iran. And I put the Noid. Can you see this? It's Avoid the Noid. It's back here, that little Noid. Does anybody know what this is from? My dad used to work at Domino's Pizza. And so this is like really aging me. My birthday is on Thursday. I'm turning 43. But my dad was like a manager at Domino's Pizza. So he would bring me like all these little things from Domino's. And it was like so much part of my story that he would come home at like 2 a.m. from his shift. And Heather, I know we're the same age. Thank you. So what would go on your language story? What would you put on this if you were going to create one that would then be a mentor text for your students to create their own, or for families to think about where language and literacy lived if you were doing like a family workshop where you were really getting to know them at maybe kind of like a literacy night or at a family conference night where you're trying to elicit information from them. So you want to show them a mentor text of all the places where literacy kind of lived for you. So my question to you is, can you in the next maybe like 10 minutes, create a slide or create a visual or make a list. What would you put on your text lineage? You don't need to listen to Googlish right now, but I highly recommend that you do. I wanted to show you an example of Kate Roberts's before we go off. Do you guys know Kate Roberts? She wrote DIY Literacy and a bunch of other texts. She was a mentor of mine for a very long time when I was a New York City teacher, and she's a friend of mine. She created one herself as well. And we have a similarity of Lauryn Hill there. So you can make connections with folks if you do some sharing. If you're a school leader, I have teachers do this at the beginning of the year, and then we do a lot of sharing so that we understand where our language and literacy journeys came from. Okay, so it is 1:53. Would it be useful to leave my example up, or would it be useful to leave these questions up? Maybe Nick put the questions in the chat. Questions. Okay, I'm gonna leave the questions up. It's 1:53. Should we take until like 2:05 to make a slide and start putting some things on there? If you need to stretch, maybe we can stretch. Is that too short of a time? What do you all think? It's okay, Nick. Yeah, I just want you to start thinking about it so that, yeah, okay, we'll start with that. So let's go to 2:05. Start some thinking around your own language journeys, and then maybe we'll do a little bit of sharing or post them on the Discord throughout the conference. That would be great. Great idea, Mel. So I'm going to leave this up, and let me know if you have any questions. authenticity of what stuck for us as adults, what is, what is showing up for us, we can maybe better serve the kids in front of us so that we can provide more authentic experiences. But I think more than anything, hopefully this experience helps us value the literacies that are happening in family homes. Because no matter what, families are growing these literacy practices. How many of you had music on there? Or how many of you had some sort of like a text that was not alphabetic? A text that was like a movie, a song, right, something else. So the expansion, the definition of what literacy is another one of the premises of this work. Charles, your hand is up. Want to share something? Maybe it was accidental.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
That's okay.
I was just raising my hand for something other than
No worries.
chat, and then I kind of forgot that that was also I want to speak signal.
No worries. Is there anything? Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, cool. So that being said, this is something that I like to do with families in lieu of at the beginning of the year, parent-teacher conferences or family conferences, where we are doing more info seeking, where we're learning more about families than we are telling them about their kids at the beginning of the year. Because we're conditioned to believe that caregivers who excelled in formal education are the ones who will support their children the most, but that's like a very harmful narrative that just really is not true. And so when we sit in reflection around how our language journeys were developed, when we think about the video that I showed you from Luce's class of Ileana Gonzalez sharing her literacy journey that was very multilingual, it was not solely text-based, but there were some alphabetic texts. We can do better at kind of collaborating and connecting, because one of the shifts is the idea that caregiving and educating is synonymous, that caregivers are doing the same work that educators are doing, that we're trying to achieve the same things anyway, and that families are teaching their children literacy every day, whether they realize it or not, right? They are teaching their children literacy every day. They're doing that in problem solving out loud. They're doing that in narrating their days. They're doing that in explaining a bill, being at the doctor together and breaking something down, being in their spiritual communities, like learning about their literacy, their grieving rituals, being at the kitchen table, right? And so all of these things are growing literacy practices, and it's up to us to kind of like generate a big old list so that families feel validated and know that they're doing that, and that we are also elevating each of these components. And so each of the chapters in my book really hone in on what I call holistic learning tenets. These holistic learning tenets exist in all of our classrooms. And you might be thinking about that right now, like where process shows up for you in your space, where you're trying to grow talk, no matter what grade you're serving, where you're offering a variety of choice, even if you have mandated curriculum now, unfortunately, right? Like forced curriculum, like where are you still offering some degree of choice, whether that's in flexible seating or, some type of grouping that you're allowing kids to, or a choice around the artifact that they're sharing, like the output of what they're going to share to share their learning. And all of these holistic learning tenets exist in family homes. These are things that like families can really easily latch onto and try to grow alongside us. That's why I chose them as the chapter topics. And so each of the chapters in my book kind of gives suggestions for how we can grow these, and also how we can give tips to families to do it, and then explains to families how we're doing it. So I just want to pause for like a minute. Which one of these elements do you feel like you're focusing on and doing really well in your classroom, that you're really like giving consideration to? And which do you want to kind of ramp up in your classroom space moving forward in the academic year? Where are you offering points of interaction? Where are you offering like opportunities to grow talk? Which ones are you really hoping that you're going to do more of? Can you just think about that for a moment? If we were together, I would have you turn and talk. You can put it in the chat. Thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing your slide. Chris, are we talking the faculty of, yeah, I think it's definitely different for K-12. Caregiving and education is synonymous. Are you thinking because biases come up? Or because families start interacting with their kids differently as their kids get older? My friend with your hand raised, please unmute and speak.
Hey man, it's Zeeshan.
Hi.
I actually don't work in education at all right now, or have ever, but my wife is a principal of a high school here in Iowa. And so I'm like constantly overhearing it. And my experience has solely been with public schools and public education. So for myself, like as someone who's gone, like moved, not gone through, someone more like had a lot of various experiences within the United States. Like everyone's talking about, I'd like to show what I did out on my screen, but it really doesn't look ridiculous.
Should I unshare so that we can see that? Let me see if I can pin you. I'm going to pin you for a moment. Can you all see that or no? Or you have to do that too. You have to pin him in order to see his page.
I'm a big fan of W.E.B. Du Bois' data visualizations that he did for like the World Fair. So when I was growing up, and just like intersectionalities, right? For example, if I just had like a intersectionalities of like religion, language, where you live geographically, economics of your family at the time, right? The cultural stuff, the life events, like visualizing it as more of this like converging event to like present day. Or like,
Interesting.
yeah, like culturally, my parents, like for example, like they're Mexican and Pakistani. So going into like the start of my life, I had that cultural stuff coming into it, even though I didn't grasp everything yet as like a child. And then like or religions, for example, like my religious experiences, like my parents were Catholic and Muslim growing up. They converted to Catholicism together, became a Jehovah's Witness. And like the entire time, right? I'm in public school. Like I'm a public school student the entire time. Going through this stuff, like these changes, right? These combinations of things like being a Jehovah's Witness pre 9/11 versus post 9/11, being that, you know, in Texas versus Illinois, all these things, and like I'm constantly running into different public educators. I think it's interesting to like note that we live in a time where these intersectionalities can become more and more and more and more pronounced. It used to be much easier back in the day to like culturally connect with your students in the classroom. Like I know, like you know, in the 80s, if you were watching a movie, everyone was watching Star Wars. So like going into the public school system, everyone could bond about Star Wars. And my wife, who like, you know, I met her like 7 years ago, I told her like, hey, you know, I don't know what y'all are doing, but kids love anime. I love anime. Kids love anime. And for some reason, you know, like how we get cultural lessons, moral lessons, ethical lessons from stuff like Star Wars, where it's like clearly Darth Vader is not the protagonist or model here. It's Luke, right? Be more like Yoda, right? Where like teachers might have a gap in connecting like who are these kids present day, like, you know, hero's journey or Jesus allegory, right? It's Goku, it's Luffy from One Piece. It's all these characters where it's the same things we have growing up. And for me, it's like, you know, Catholicism to Jehovah's Witness to agnosticism to like Islam and Judaism all have so many shared things in Abrahamic faith where if you're like Christian or Catholic in the US, you're often at a really good start to deal with your Jewish and Muslim students. If you can connect that intersectionality, if you can be like, oh yeah, when they do these things or say Allah or this stuff, it's the same thing as my thing.
Right.
When they have these like when they're looking for heroes and role models, they're gonna do it in like their mediums. And if it's like anime or TikToks and stuff, if we're not watching it or like knowing what they're doing, we're not gonna be able to connect to the fact that their models, you know, their heroes, their ideas, their philosophies are not brand new.
Thank you so much. I number one, love your visual. I love the spiraling nature of it, how it leads to the present day you. It's like definitely something that I'm going to use and recommend in my own model. The other thing that you made me think about is I just got back from a trip to Japan with Tiffany Jewell and a group of educators with an organization called Teach with Love. And we talked about how easy it might be for folks in Japan who are educated to connect with their kids because of how homogeneous their classroom spaces are. and how different and difficult and challenging it might feel for us because of how varied the fabric of our classroom spaces are. And so I think you really spoke to that also, that it's up to us to find the places of connectivity. It's up to us to recognize all the intersectionalities of our kids. And it's up to us to kind of springboard those conversations with kids and families so that they feel validated. Thank you so, so much. And so if you think about the holistic learning tenets, if you think about building community, building process, building interaction, building talk, building observation and choice, families can really latch on to this if we help them recognize what they are already doing. And so what I want to do now is one of my favorite things to do with families and with teachers is to brainstorm. If I were with you, I would make us do this in groups on chart paper, really big and large kind of scale, because I like paper. What do families do every day? And what literacy learning is happening in those moments. And so if on the left side, we brainstorm, for example, going to the grocery store, what learning is happening at the grocery store? What literacy learning is happening in the grocery store? You can put it in the chat if you want. For example, there is budgeting happening. There is maybe a list making happening for the ingredients that you need for a meal. There is price comparison happening. There is geographic navigation happening of the aisles and where things exist in the spaces. Absolutely. Nutrition lessons, maybe even social cues when it comes to like somebody behind you in line or in front of you in line. I can't tell you the number of times that somebody has like broken down in the grocery store and my kids have noticed that somebody is crying in the grocery store. So there's like points of connection in the grocery store as well. Maybe there's like kind of like cultural conversations around like, do you have this spice? Do you have this like specific spice that we need or the specific ingredient for a kind of like cultural meal? Reading vegetables and fruits for ripeness. Oh my gosh, I actually have never heard anybody say that in all the time that I've been doing this. That's amazing to make that connection that it's also reading. Yeah, how do we test fruits and vegetables for ripeness? You can also, I mean, there's so much learning that happens in a grocery store visit. Okay, what else would you put on the left-hand side? What brainstorming of all that families do on the left-hand side, and what learning is happening in those moments? My friend at Human Restoration Project, do you feel like we can move into breakout rooms and do this in breakout rooms so they can brainstorm with each other briefly? Or it won't be on the recording, and so that's not lovely.
If we go to breakout rooms, we could just share out at the end and we can just crop it together and make it
If that's okay, I think it's valuable for folks to talk to each other about this. And so if we can go into like totally randomized, even groups of 4 or however many you think, for 5 minutes or 4.5 minutes.
2:25 Eastern at least.
That would be great.
All right.
And what we want to do is brainstorm things that families are doing, like, you know, commuting, like going to the doctor, like whatever families do with their kids and what learning is happening in those moments. That's what we're hoping to create, a big list.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to shift this into breakout rooms here, folks. Again, you got 5 minutes. Don't panic when you just arrive in the room. It's just going to be completely random.
I'll come pop in and see you.
It's going to be great. Sorry, I got to do some mental math here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 breakout rooms. All right.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. It should pop up and have you go.
and my passion, that is engagement, that is family engagement, and that there's literacy learning happening in those moments. Do I readily recognize that as literacy learning? Maybe not as a mom, but it's true that it is, right? What other things showed up on either in your conversations or if you were brainstorming that kind of list? Like if I gave you a lot of time, these lists like become very, very long. We talk about like, you know, what happens at celebrations. There's conflict resolution. What happens when there's emotional dysregulation in families, and what kinds of learning is happening in those spaces? What happens when families go to like the museum with their kids or see a mural and they analyze a piece of art and ask, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? Which is one of the lab sites that I do with families. And so one of our jobs is to communicate to families that they are always growing literacy, regardless of whether or not they recognize that or realize that. And so again, one of the family workshops that I do is I bring them in and I do this with them so that they're like, whoa, I can actually, I'm teaching in all these instances. I'm actually doing the work of a literacy teacher. I'm doing that by narrating, by talking, by working things out, by naming that as a problem or a solution, right? By giving steps or choice. So that is another premise of the work, is validating. And one of the ways that we can do that is by communicating differently. And so in my book, I do have suggestions for how we can communicate with families differently. Often we send emails, often we send newsletters, we send paper home. We have all kinds of different apps for reminding families. What I have found in my work across the country is the invitations, anytime you have the opportunity for a child to create an invitation or a summary or anything for their families, they are more willing to attend. They are more willing to pay attention. They are more interested in being a participant. And I think about this all the time, and I don't mind throwing him under the bus directly with love, is my husband doesn't read anything that comes home, right? It doesn't mean that he's a disengaged parent. It means that he's like a super busy parent. He will not look at a piece of paper. He doesn't connect to any of my children's apps for any of the, right? And so probably he is frowned upon from a teacher standpoint. He does not engage in that way with communicating with school or with classroom practice. What will he attend though? He will attend something that our children ask him to attend for a specific reason if they know the purpose and they know the why behind it. He will attend if the kid is going to do something interactive with him as opposed to just being a talking head on a stage or something that feels rote and kind of like non-personalized. And so like think about the John Cassianos in your lives, right? Like think about the people who are either too busy or really don't want to engage unless it's a real specific why that feels personalized. And so I'm always thinking about the different ways that we can communicate. So do y'all need a stretch break? Are you fine? We have like 45 minutes, right? Are we going to 3:15 Eastern time?
Correct.
Okay. So if you need a stretch break, your adults, please do that. Okay. So family. The word family means something different to each of us, okay? So when I ask you to do this, please humor me. Just close your eyes briefly. And when I say the word family, when I say the word famille in Farsi, familia in Spanish, who or what comes to mind? Is it the family that you created? Is it chosen family? Is it the family who made you? Is it emotional? Is it connected to a specific place? Like whose sounds do you hear? Whose voices do you hear? What location are you in when I say family? Where are you? Are you gathered? Like what comes to mind when I say the word family? Now, if we were in one space together and I asked you to draw or sketch out who is on your family web or in your constellation of care and the people of your life, chosen or otherwise, I am sure that none of us would have the same definition of family. I am sure that none of us would have the same page. Because when I do this across the country, all of these different things come up, right? We've got folks who, when I say family, tear up immediately. We've got folks who imagine a running brook in a specific tree. We have people who say it doesn't have any location or space when I say family. We have people who only think of the family who created them. We have people who think about only the family they created. My husband is not close to his family at all, so he mostly thinks about chosen family, right? Gosh, I'm talking about him a lot today. I will let him know. So when I say the word family, whether we want to or not, we have our own biases around how families should look, sound, and act. And we communicate with the families in our classrooms accordingly. That's just like the way that we are as humans, right? And so we have our own kind of like preconceived notions about family. And as a result, we make these assumptions. We make assumptions about kids because we're trying to like fill in the blanks for the stuff that we don't know. And so when I say that word family, I'm wondering if you envision like a heteronormative household with two parents. Are you envisioning a specific kind of family makeup, right? What assumptions do you make about how families should look, sound, and act? And just sit with it. Like just spend some time sitting with it. Because if you imagine a specific way that families should look, sound, and act, because that's how you were raised, or that's how our society sets things up, right? Inadvertently, without us realizing it, we might be in our language, in our curricular resources, or in our invitations, alienating folks. We just don't realize it. And because all families look different, and because all kinds of folks with different backgrounds have different levels of non-blood relatives and, who we call like aunties or khales or abuelas and titis, and right, who may or may not be blood relatives, but still carry so much of the importance of the collection and the collective and the raising of the kids. It's important that our assignments, our invitations, our language, our mentor texts, our picture books, our short stories, everything that we represent has to be so widely varied. Otherwise, we're inadvertently perpetuating what's normal. Okay. And so I interviewed for my book, Nefertari Nkenje. She actually did New York City teaching fellows with me. She's now a principal in Detroit. And she was talking about like her daughter feeling so super alienated because her daughter couldn't capture anybody who was important to her on the family tree. So when she was assigned the family tree, she actually had nobody to put on there because it was like a very basic template for a family tree. But she had all these people in her life. They were non-blood relatives. They held so much story. They held so much importance. None of them were blood related. And she literally couldn't put them on the page, right? And so I just want to think about that all the time. Because there's no one way that families should look, sound, or act, drawing from all these different texts that, are very, very important to me. We really have to draw on community wisdom and abuelita knowledge, this idea that there are funds of knowledge way beyond just the blood relatives or the heteronormative father, mother, two kids and a dog scenario, bringing really all of the intersectionalities of our kids to the fore. And so like this was my family on my Arab side, and it carried so much shame for me when I was a young kid because like, I just thought that, perhaps everybody didn't have myriad cousins, like in their house showing up in burqas and showing up in dishtashes, and as a result, like I carried deep shame and didn't even want to bring my family around my school space. Like I was so deeply, deeply embarrassed. And so when we do this like constellations of care, I do this with families, and I'm saying this to you because instead of doing family conferences, instead of doing literacy nights, these are the kinds of invitations that I bring to families, so that I get to know them better, so that I can better serve the kids. And so I do the same kind of like, close your eyes, what does family mean to you? And I have them brainstorm alongside their children. Or I have kids create these over time with their families and then go home and interview family members. Or one of the things that we do across time in the schools where I coach is we'll create constellations of care and then many different assignments and many different invitations for families to come back to that constellation of care visual over time. So we'll also do like thank you letters, gratitude letters to someone on your constellation of care, writing kind of like a ancestral legacy of someone who has passed, who contributed and helped them grow, because we often don't talk about people who have passed. But like in a lot of different cultures, it's important to bring folks who are not here anymore to the space, right? To like talk about the people who have impacted us. So if you were to create a constellation of care, if you were to create your own mentor text with all the people in your garden that helped you grow, who would you put on there? Who would your mentor text be? What kinds of examples would you put on there so that kids never felt alienated, no matter how their kind of family made, you know, how their family showed up? Nick is asking, Nawal, what response do you get from educators, parents, and students who make the shift towards, say, a constellation of care compared to a typical parent-teacher of conference? So you always hear, I felt seen, heard. I felt like they wanted to know me better. I felt like it was more of a conversation as opposed to a telling me about my child. So when you think about all the data that we can collect about kids and families, this is one way that you can collect data in a soft kind of, it becomes more of a, I truly want to get to know you, breaking bread conversation, as opposed to a, let me tell you how to grow your child's literacy. It's a completely different kind of conversation, but we're still achieving the same result. In my book, I'm writing a second book. It's been due. It will be turned in soon. I have examples of constellations of care from schools across the country that families have co-created with their children, that just speak to the kinds of people that we are considering our caregivers. So we've got kids who are saying things like, the bodega owner down the street is important to me because I sit and debrief my day with them before my mom picks me up. We have people putting all kinds of non-blood relatives on their constellations of care because literacy lives in those spaces, but also because those people are important to those children and they deserve a place on the constellation of care. So when we're thinking about nourishing caregiver collaborations, when we're thinking about connecting with families, family has got to be a really, really expansive definition of the word family, because everybody carries a different definition and everybody has a different family makeup, right? And we have our own biases around how families need to act and look. And so it's up to us to also add and be nimble to our curriculum texts that show lots of different ways that families show up. Any questions about just constellations of care and how you can like bring them into your classroom space? It's one of my favorite things to think about and do.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Noel.
Please.
It seemed if you go back to the slide that you had up.
Let me go and put it up so that you can tell me. This
Yeah,
one?
so I think these are really great questions, but it seems to me there's a question that comes before it, and I'm going to throw out what I think it may be, but I just wanted to see if you were, because I think it's all coming under the idea of family, but what you're trying to do is to say that a family are those people who provide care for one another. It's like, that seems to me where you're heading with that. So the question is, who provides us care? Who cares for us? And who do we provide care for? And then if you go back to the previous slide,
This one?
then you say, well, who are those people to you? What makes them unique? How did they? And is that? I'm just trying to make this a little more concrete for myself. So
Absolutely. Absolutely, Tom. That's exactly it. And so, yes, if you are going to actually assign this as like you're going to model it and you're going to create it, this is just giving you kind of the why behind it, the why it's so important for us to recognize kinship of various levels. But yeah, you're going to visually represent the people in your collective who support you. You can use any form you want. You can use a tree, a garden, or a skyscape. The way you put it is also beautiful. I have a suggested book list on my website of like the types of mentor texts that I use to show families looking a lot of different ways that you can pepper in and read and share examples of depending on your age group. But yeah, a family is anyone who provides care for you, grows you, is important to you, or had an impact on you. They don't even need to be present physically now, right? And so in your examples, in the folks that you're going to put on your mentor, I try to think about people who are beyond my blood relative definition, so that if a child is there in front of me needing an example of someone outside of their blood relatives who has an impact, or someone who's passed, I provide that springboard for them. And it can look a lot of different ways, and I do it in all different grade levels. Sometimes I do it just with children, and then I send it home for kids to add, or parents to add to, families to add to. Sometimes I do it alongside families, and I have them co-create it with their kids. Sometimes I extend it, depending on the school and the engagement and how much flexibility they have in the space, right? Sometimes we come back to it and tell stories about us with someone on our constellation of care. That could be a personal narrative. That could be a little interview. That could be a thank you letter, right? There's so much you could do with it. But the idea is we have to expand our definitions of family so that when we communicate with kids and their caregivers, we don't inadvertently alienate with the language we use or with the assignments that we have. Is that helpful? Cool. So you can represent it in a lot of different ways. Here are more people on my constellation of care. When my kids were growing up in Chicago, I had a coach house, like a little tiny apartment in the backyard on top of, it was like a studio, a dinky little studio on top of the garage. And my best friend from Michigan, who I went to college with, University of Michigan, was Ryan, this guy here. And he lived there with his boyfriend, Ryan, during the pandemic. So when my kids were making their constellations of care for my first book, they all wanted to put Ryan and Ryan on their constellations of care. These are my, like, you know, the people who live in my neighborhood now, they're part of my constellation of care. This is my birthday 1 year ago. My girlfriends, my constellation of care. This is Carla España, who wrote En Comunidad. These are my siblings, right? These are my parents. So you can have folks bring in photos and create their constellations of care and tell stories about them. And that's one way that you can get to know families better at the beginning of the year. I always, if I can and have the power, switch up my first family conference, my first parent teacher conference, with info seeking this type of creation instead of let me tell you the expectations alone, because it totally shifts the year. As a parent of 4 kids who goes to different schools, and I like enter and I'm the mother in that scenario, the schools that just give us the list of expectations are the schools where I feel like I don't belong. You know, where we sit in a tiny chair and we're listening specifically about like the uniform or make sure that your child XYZ, instead of like, what do you want me to know about you and your family? Because the rest will come. The expectations can come in a list. The expectations can come on a piece of paper, right? So these constellations of care can look a lot of different ways, because every family does literacy already. All caregivers add value, no matter what their life experiences are. And what we want to do is move beyond a transactional, fear-based kind of level of engagement. Thinking about the first definition of engagement, what family engagement is, we have to deconstruct the false parallel that education happens solely in school. It doesn't. We know that literacy happens outside of school all the time. We've listed it. We've talked about our language stories. We've talked about what language story was stickiest for us, and they were not necessarily schooled literacies. So I'm going to skip this part for time purposes, but you will get my deck maybe, Chris and Nick. I'm totally fine to share it. From Street Data by Shane Saphir and Jamila Duggan, there is an empathy interview that I love to just use as a springboard for giving families conversation starters that they can have with their kids about class. Conversations like, are you enjoying class? What makes you a great kid? How do you learn best? What advice do you have for your teacher? Because families don't often know what kinds of questions to ask their kids about school, other than, how's it going? Did you act right? Did you do your homework? Like, because they're not necessarily well equipped with knowing the types of questions, it's up to us to give them some. And so I like to think about the kinds of questions that we can ask families to get to know them really well. And then I also have questions that we can give families to ask us and ask their children. So I just want you to look at this list briefly. It's in my book on page 35, but you can also take a screenshot and you could also totally add to it. Thanks, Ryan, for throwing that in the chat. Where and when at home does your family engage in language building, storytelling, conversation, reading? What stories do you enjoy telling? What do you like to do alongside your child? What passions do you have personally that you want to share with your child? So if I wasn't super into the WNBA, my kids wouldn't be really into basketball, maybe. And that is a point of engagement for me and my children. And families don't necessarily realize that their own passions are really useful. What sorts of texts do you read? What knowledge about your family and ancestry is important that you want your kids to learn? Listen, if you know that, you can weave those types of holidays, markers, traditions into the layers of your own classroom space, right? Because then you know better. And what you're doing is also communicating to families, look, all of this is important. All of this is valuable. You do a lot of literacy by making recipes, by sharing recipes and making lists, by writing thank you cards, by putting do not enter signs that our kids are like, there's a post-it on my kid's door that's like, I'm so sorry that I stole your money. Can I still enter? What is this from? That's literacy. So an activity that I ask teachers to do periodically, and if I were working with your school leaders, I would make them give you time to do this, is to make like a 3-prong list and list out 5 families from time to time. List the things that you know about them, and then list what you really wish that you knew, so that we can recognize that what happens is often our biases come up in the middle column. So like our brains rush to fill what we assume about families in the middle, because what we're trying to know about the kid doesn't often come directly. It comes through like what we're noticing about how they look, how they show up to class, right? And then what do we want to know and how can we learn it? Often the stuff on the last column can come from family conferences if we change the way that our family conferences look. Or it can come in a family lab site, which I'm going to describe to you now. So if we widen the definition of literacy and we give families questions that they can ask us, like, what does my child do really well? And how does my child learn best? And who does my child work well with? Like, if we give them these questions, what happens is we're breaking down the barriers between home and school so that families feel better equipped to understand what we're doing. We feel better equipped to understand what they're doing at their houses so that we can validate the heck out of everything they're doing. And what we're doing is like reducing these gates that have been up historically between home and school. So I'm going to pause because that's like a lot. And I'm going to give you a minute to just look at this list of access questions. This list is not like the end all be all. And it's kind of overwhelming to give families all of these at once because they're just not used to hearing and seeing these. But it's a really good accountability tool for us. Because if you don't know the answers to these questions for all your students, we should. And like I come to you as a caregiver more with this list, because many times I would meet my kids' teachers and they wouldn't know like what inspires wonder or awe in one of my kids, right? Like they wouldn't know that my son, for example, was obsessed with baseball. And if you knew that he was obsessed with baseball, you could have given him anything connected to baseball and he would have shut his mouth and paid attention to that thing, because I know that about my child, right? But did the teacher know? Did the teacher know? And all he did was live, eat, and breathe baseball. But by spring, the teacher didn't know, right? And so I say this so that we really think about how we can equip families to better talk to us about what's happening in the classroom, and we can better get to know what's happening in their spaces. So what questions do you have just about access questions or communication or any of this before I move on? because I'm going to move into lab site stuff soon.
When you say often, when you say that that you communicate or you have your teachers communicate with caregivers often, how often are we talking about? Like once a month, like a couple times, like.
So I like to do family lab sites, these invitations where families come to the class to do something four times a year at minimum. So if you think about like 4 times a year plus whatever you've got going on, it's like not that much.
No, it's like nothing.
It's not that
And
much. And these are like really low stakes kind of invitations. When I say like communicate, I mean, I think if possible, like a in-person, just see you outside the building kind of thing is like a way of communication, right? So think about all the different ways that we kind of just connect with families. Because often like at drop off, at pickup, I mean, all of our systems are different. And so like, and also lots of rules around like entering and exiting schools, et cetera, et cetera. Kids might come along, right? But I think about across the year, there's no like, we have to try all of these different things. We have to try a literacy night. We have to have family conferences. We have to have all the different kind of things that are already in place, plus 4 family lab sites, and you're going to reach somebody at some point, right? Like you'll catch them all if you do all the different ways. You'll try all the different ways. Like you'll reach Justin Cassiano at some point, maybe not with paper, but maybe in a different way, right? Like think about all the different kinds of ways that we can reach them and then throw the net.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
It's like giving Pokemon.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It wasn't purposeful. Okay. Nawal, in schools where this shift is made, is it primarily driven, supported by admin, teachers, and community members? So I actually think it has worked best when one teacher has shown a difference in the ways that they bring alive family collaboration. And then other teachers are like, yo, what are you doing? It seems like your families are super involved and you got a lot more hands or a lot more attendance or a lot happier kids. So our output happens to be like the points of data, which in my next book, I have like an entire chapter around data, because it's not just like, how do you know if family collaboration is working? How you know family collaboration is working is you do see increase in attendance, but you see happier children because you see families who know what's up. They've come to your classroom, they've participated, they feel validated with the stuff that you're doing at home, and they understand kind of sort of the kinds of things that you're trying to tackle. And they're like, oh, I actually can ramp up a little bit what I'm doing at home to support that teacher. What you have is a lot more teachers as a result of families understanding you better. And so it's really about a classroom teacher showing impact. Second step there is to show some visual impact. So putting on your walls shared creations with families, showing like actual artifacts to another classroom teacher or to admin to say like, hey, I tried a couple shifts. This is how change was made. Look at my numbers. And those numbers are things like happier kids, attendance, like just the vibe is completely different. If that kind of answers your question. And so these are still around the access questions. These are the kinds of questions I give families so that families feel better equipped to ask me questions. They're in my book. I like to give them like in a column, 1 column at a time at each kind of connection point with families. So I can say like, I want you to know that I know these about your kids. It holds me accountable and it makes families feel better equipped. So now I just want you to think in the last 15 minutes, this is my favorite part, about like when historically your school has connected with families. Because what I found in all of my interviews when I was researching is that education spaces tend to tell families and caregivers, this is how you can help me grow literacy. Read for 20 minutes a day. Don't forget to do the sight word list. Please do this. Make sure they do their homework. So this model completely shifts the way that we look at family engagement. In a more culturally nourishing framework, we get to know families and caregivers and the literacy practices in homes first. We bring that into our education space by better knowing the kids and families. And then we output by inviting families into the fold to co-grow literacy alongside us, which grows instructional promise, which like elevates instructional promise, which creates a variety of collaborators, as opposed to a top-down approach of do this because I know better, right? Because I told you this is how we're supposed to grow it. It's much more about, what have you been doing? How do you operate? What is your way of speaking, communicating, listening? What texts are important to you? What cultural markers are you experiencing or want your kids to experience? Oh, that really helps me have insight into you. You are validated. Come on and listen, share with us in our classrooms. And instructional promise grows. So the last chapter of the book is this like collective care framework. It's, you know, the way forward. Each of these buckets are components that we want to move the dial in over time. You cannot move the dial in any of these overnight. This is not a one-off. It is not a checklist. It is what over time, over like 3 years is where I see impact, 3 years of practice of really consciously thinking about being more language inclusive, about being more intergenerational in our invitations, about really communicating constantly this expansive definition of literacy, by thinking about potentially the caregivers' negative experiences with school. You know how many times I interviewed folks where they were like, they make me sit in really little chairs and then they stand above me and talk at me, down at me. Physical space matters. Mean secretaries make a difference. Literally everything when it comes to how families and schools interact makes a difference. And so what I like to do is take an event, take something that you do in your class or in your school and put it in the middle of this. For example, like if you have a multicultural night at your school, or let's say you have just like a typical literacy night and you put it in the middle. How many of these buckets are you like really thinking about or checking off or moving the dial in? And which bucket do you have a question about that you want me to maybe like elaborate on? I'm going to talk to you about family lab sites, Mason, right after this. Does anybody have any questions just about this kind of framework or any of these buckets? Monique, is that a hand?
I was mostly talking to myself, trying to figure out if I could phrase the question, and I don't have it yet. So I was trying to problem solve through it.
Okay. Does anybody have a question about round reach? Or y'all know what round reach is? Because that's usually what people say is like, what is round reach? So I'll just elaborate a little. The idea of round reach is the idea that every component of growing family engagement has to do with all of us interacting and being part of the fabric of changing the way that we talk about families and talk about caregivers. Because a family even could potentially be triggering, right? The word family might be too sad or intense for some folks. So really expanding even the ways that we talk about caregiving and caregivers. We need authors to participate. We need all admin to really understand these components. We need teachers and families to kind of change the ways that we talk about. So all of this is kind of the idea of round reach is that like we all have to wrap our arms around the collective care model in order to actually make a change. So it's not meant to happen overnight. It's meant to be thought through and thoughtful every part of the decisions that you make as a classroom teacher. So I'm just going to talk about family lab sites because Mason had a question about it and I just want to like say concretely what they are. So 4 times a year, in some of my schools 6 times a year, we invite families into the classroom space to basically be a co-partner with their children to do something at a literacy lesson that I model in front of the families, a strategy that they're going to then turn and talk with their kids and try out. And then they're going to go turn and talk and continue to try on their own while I confer with them. Then I'm going to bring them back to the carpet and I'm going to debrief how that's growing literacy. in those really kind of low stakes invitations, I'm going to give you some examples of the kinds of invitations. Families see the gradual release of responsibility. Families are co-creating or co-trying something alongside their kids as partners. Families are seeing what their kids are like in the classroom space. Families are experiencing the classroom space. Families are getting tips for how they can continue that work naturally at home. It's super easy, super short, and it's like kind of personal. So for example, I do one for all grades that's like a see, notice, wonder with images. So I'll put an image on the screen of my kids or my family, and I will say, let me show you how you can read a text. I'm going to read this text, and then I'm going to model how I see the picture. I notice a lot of details, and I ask a lot of questions about that picture. Then I have them turn and try it with another picture with their parents. Then they analyze that picture. I'm sharing a little bit about my family because I say, like, I am the author of this text. This is Eloisa. She is hiding behind this thing, right? Like I give them some insight into me so that it's like breaking down the barriers even more. They're learning about me as a teacher. I tell them what the strategy is. I tell them reading pictures is valuable to us. It is a form of reading. It is not just alphabetic reading that is important. Research has shown that kids who can read images can analyze alphabetic text later, better, stronger, because they're growing that analyzing muscle, right? I talk about visual literacy a little bit. I have them go off and try it in books where they're just reading pictures with their kids. They're not reading words on the page. So this is every language can try it out. I always have a translator. So like in all the schools that I model this in, I've had like live translation. I've had like translators in Chinese. I've had translators like in Mandarin and Spanish and Arabic. I've had translators of different like parents who then translate for a little table, parents who translate for a little table so that no barriers are up. And then I give them tips for how to try it out at home and how to continue that at home. I say, this is really useful for all these reasons. This is what you just did with your kids. So often families don't come at the beginning. You just have a handful of families. So then it's really lovely when kids write the invitations. Then you get more families. You try out different times a day. So you try it at the beginning of the day, right after drop off. You have it at the end of the day at pickup. You try it on, right? You invite not just parents or caregivers, but you invite a sibling who's in the building. You invite an aunt or a cousin or a neighbor to come and try it. We have lessons around reading. We have lessons around writing. All of them are kind of strategy based and connected to curriculum. So like when I work with teachers in this, we look at the curriculum and we say, when are the 4 natural places where families could be invited and participate that would give us a lot of runway? For example, at the beginning of a writing lesson, a writing unit, brainstorming with families is so helpful because no kid has an empty page. All kids can turn with their family and be like, oh my gosh, remember when, remember when, remember when. And they then have a brainstormed kind of springboard that then helps them for the writing because it was like personal or it was helpful. And then families know what's coming home because families were part of the brainstorming. So they then know. So family lab sites are like, to me, the most invaluable way to invite a reduction of barriers. It's actually, to me, it changes the kind of the whole fabric of the classroom. And they're really low stakes. If you see me model it, it's like I can plan it on a Post-it. It doesn't take a ton of time. You shouldn't stress about it. Usually the takeaway that teachers say is like, I can't believe I'm going to try it out tomorrow. And then they usually say right after that, it was so great. I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to do it again. Like more invitations, better. And then you've got, I mean, the evidence is showing that families will take like multiple public transportation. They won't miss it. The Jonathan Cassianos of the world don't miss those because it's interacting with your kids. It's doing something with your child, right? Alongside them to create something and help them understand better what we're trying to achieve in the classroom. Monique.
Sorry, that led me to the question that I was thinking.
Okay,
So how do you, when it comes to equity, when it comes to access, and when it comes to making sure that the people show up, for example, I teach in a pretty diverse district, and that's not shorthand for Black or brown. It just literally means diverse.
Yep.
With a lot of different social classes. I teach in a suburb of Boston, so we have the history of busing and the chaos that was the attempt of desegregation. How what systems or supports do you have in place for making sure that all families are able to participate, regardless of whether they live in the same town as your district, or whether they have different working hours, or if a parent has multiple jobs and can't usually make school activities?
Totally. So I've done it just across the country in a variety of ways. You have to make sure that the timing is changed so that you are not alienating. You're not going to stick to an 8 a.m., right? You're going to try out different ones and see who you can catch. You are going to be very expansive in your definition of who can join and who should join, and really try to make it so that every kid has some sort of representation at least once across the year. Often kids don't. So we invite other families to bring in another kid. Like, can you sit with this family? Can you join? Or I invite other adults in the building to be the partner of the child, so that a child is never completely alone, right? But it's different if it's someone who's personal to the kid. So then I reach out personally to the families. What is the barrier? What can I do? How can I make it so that your kid at some point has representation across this year? Often there are kind of like emotional experiences that happen in lab sites, positive and, you know, in every direction. You know, like we do a family lab site around like a family recipe and sharing a family recipe. And sometimes there's like food insecurity. And so there's like, there was like a child who got triggered specifically because like her dad wasn't there to make pancakes anymore, because her dad had recently, like, it could be one word, it could be one specific meal, it could be one specific, I don't have that, I don't, or it could be, I have that, I used to have that. I mean, but what that does is provide a space for you to then know that about that kid. That kid never shared that in any other capacity because we didn't have the opportunity or the invitation. And now I know that, and I can love up on that child in a different way. Right. And so the data is still, to me, more important as a result of the invitations that we create. And it's really up to us to be really nimble and have a really unapologetic, positive regard for all families without judgment.
Yeah, I mean, I totally believe in everything that you're saying. It's just, I was just wondering about the absence of some of those parents and the impact it can have on students.
Yeah,
but you covered that, so thank you.
Yeah, if you notice that it's a pattern, what can we do to change it? Who else can we invite? Is there a sibling in the building? Is there a XYZ, right? Like, what can I do to make it at least once in the school year, right? It doesn't have to be every time. Every kid is not going to have someone every single time. Mason.
Is this typically something you will do during like the class day? Like the parents will come in while you are teaching a regular class and they will join you in the classroom, and then the students who you would regularly have during that time of the day are there with the parents.
Yep.
Okay.
With their
Got
caregiver, like that is their new partner, straight up.
Got
it. The rug, even if they're bigger kids, like I bring them close to me to do the thing, and then I send them off, and then based on how ready they are to hear any part of what I want to unpack with them, I say things like, that was just gradual release of responsibility. It's how most of my lessons are orchestrated. Or maybe that's not where I go in the direction of whatever I think the families need to hear. So if what I think the families need to hear is that like visual literacy is super important, I'm going to hone in on that over and over and over again. And it's very like positive, unapologetically like joyful. It's less lesson, more invitation to share a literacy experience where we're like learning through osmosis what we're also trying to achieve. Yes, definitely different times of day are helpful. Kim says, is there something you think is the best starting place? Low effort, high? Yes, I think inviting families into your classroom space to share something with their kids and create something at the beginning of a unit is the most impactful thing to begin. So as we are wrapping up, these are examples of family lab sites and kind of what it looks like. But this is like the main premise, thinking back to our first request to write down our definition of family engagement. The most important thing to me is to recognize that families engaged with their kids, period, anywhere, outside of classroom spaces, in any language, in any way, is family engagement. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not they attend our stuff, whether or not they come to report card pickup, whether or not they read the letters home. That's not family engagement. Family engagement is literally collaborating with their kids in literacy, talking to their children in any language, living alongside their children is a kind of family engagement, right? Like family engagement encompasses so much more than just like come to the building when I say. And so I'm hoping that I like gave you a lot of food for thought. I'm hoping that you have an idea for like one small shift that you can make, whether that's bringing a different kind of read aloud to your class that is representing families differently, inviting a collective care approach, or trying out a collective care map instead of a family tree, brainstorming alongside families all the ways that they're growing literacy anyway, giving families access questions so that they know what to talk to you about. What is one thing that you will try? If you don't mind just jotting that down as we wrap up in this last minute. I'm just going to tell you that I just like cannot believe how much I talked about my husband today. It's like kind of ridiculous, but so his dad was raised in around Museo del Barrio in Manhattan, which is like at 119th and Lexington, where in Spanish Harlem. And his dad was super, super obsessed with salsa music. He's Puerto Rican. And he was specifically obsessed with this guy named Joe Baton, who was his neighbor, who was my father-in-law's neighbor, who was a Filipino and Black singer whose, you know, musical heritage was not salsa music, but because he lived in that neighborhood, he became obsessed with it. So we recently went to go to one of Joe Baton's concerts. He's still performing with his wife, you know, they're 80 years old. And it occurred to me how much literacy learning happened in my husband as a result of his dad's passion for Joe Baton. Because John, my husband, knows so much about salsa music. He knows so much about Joe Baton and how he went to jail and how he was gang involved and all the kind of the legacy and the history and the details of salsa because of his father's passion for salsa music. And so it's our job as educators to do that kind of validation, to say to families, whatever it is that you are super passionate about, bring that alive in your houses and in your lives. That is family engagement. Those kinds of conversations are more invaluable and stickier and more authentic when it comes to literacy and language development than any of our notes home, right? And so I just like put this video. That's it. So these are the texts that I'm just going to recommend that are like my recent loves and babies that you can screenshot for a variety of reasons, personal or otherwise. And thank you for choosing to spend live time with me, and thank you for time on video if you're watching the recording. I appreciate you all. I will stay for questions if you want to screenshot this or follow me on socials. And thank you, Human Restoration Project, for having me. I am only 1 minute over.
We did it. We managed to fit a lot of caregiver community collaborations into 2 hours. I don't know why I'm blurry all of a sudden. I sat down and I'm blurry. But my goodness, thank you. Yes, and we'll share slides with everyone. We'll share recordings with people. This might just be a logistical question for Chris, only because we're using the same Zoom room for all of our things, and we do have an event. But Nawal, if you're fine with it, if a couple people have questions, could we just keep the room going, Chris, for a minute and have people do a little Q&A? Would that be okay?
Sure. If anyone has any questions, we can definitely keep the room open.
Yes, I will stay for a couple
Yeah,
minutes.
we can just stick around, and I guess I'll cede the floor, except to say, again, huge thank you to you, Nawal, for your work and for sharing it here with us today. I was engaged from start to finish. My brain's on fire. And again, just thank you for everyone for, you know, your open engagement and participation. These aren't casual conversations. You can't be disengaged from you know, work, because family is so deeply personal to us as it is for the, you know, families that we're working with. So thank you all for that as well. And of course, I'll seed things back over there. And if people want to join us in 10 minutes, Chris, is that right? For our own HRP's own real quick event, we'll do that. But otherwise, go ahead and ask away.
Thank you. Thank you, friends. Thanks for the birthday wishes. Raj, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering if you knew of any ways that teachers have done these strategies for secondary level of grades?
Yeah, honestly, it's the exact same. It's actually wild to see teenagers and just like sit alongside. So one of the things that I like to do in Family Lab site is to draw special places, like make a map of a special place, make a map of a place that held a lot of emotion for us. So often I do that Family Lab site in secondary, and they sit there completely silently and they draw. And then families are always just like crying, like I never even sit down and have conversations in that way, just even silently, visually sitting there, being proximate to my kid, because we don't like have that opportunity anymore. And so I actually just do the same work, basically. It's no different. I like actually, I even use picture books. And at the beginning, I like make a bunch of jokes and like roll my eyes in front of them to show that like, no, but also, or I will like break down a TikTok meme, or I'll break down memes, or I'll make them make memes with their families. You know, like I do the same work.
Okay. Are there any like sort of like big logistical changes that you would change between like like I'm in a middle school right now, so like anything that you would change there that you would think of, or
So logistically, like literally the only thing that I don't do is I don't make them go sit on the rug. I do say like I really want you to gather and come close to me, because it's important for me to come close before I send you off to go try a thing. But I don't make like big brolic folks sit down on their legs for like, 10 minutes. If it's like uncomfortable for them. That's literally the only logistical thing. I'm also a middle school teacher, so I do a lot of like, I know you think this is whack, but it's gonna be great. Believe me, you'll love it. Like you just like kind of gotta be yourself.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions for Nawal?
Oh, you're just gonna smile. Okay, cool.
Well, in that case, thanks again, Nawal.
Sure.
Again, we have a little thread on Discord. If you all want to share out your literacy stories, you can do so on there. Nawal will get you in the Discord, so you can check those out.
Yes, you keep talking about it. I have FOMO.